Hi everyone, thank you for joining the webinar. I think, we'll get started now. So thank you all for joining. Today's webinar is covering social media and storytelling. And today we have Tereza Litsa from Lightful that will be delivering the webinar. James Gadsby was originally due to deliver the webinar, but he had to unfortunately pull out last week. But we're very grateful for Tereza for joining us today and taking the time out of the schedule to deliver this webinar. So thank you again, Tereza. I'll let you, Tereza, give a bit of introduction about her background and introduce yourself.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Really great to be here today. So my name is Tereza Litsa. I'm doing marketing and social media at Lightful, and I've been working on marketing in general the last 7 years and doing training in the nonprofit sector the last 3 years. So I'm usually talking about social media quite a lot.
Great to hear. We have a true expert here to do the webinar. We also have Alex Day from the director on the webinar as well. So Tereza, if you mind sharing the slides, I can just run through the first two housekeeping. Yeah. So and go to the next slide. We'll cover the presentation. So Tereza will be covering each social media channel, and we've slightly split up the webinar this time around. So after each channel has been covered, there'll be a brief pause for people to ask questions, and then we'll move on to the next channel, and we'll also have a Q&A section at the end for more general questions. Please use the Q&A box at the bottom to pose any questions. Please use the chat function on the right-hand side to leave any comments or introduce yourself or share your LinkedIn profile network with other guests. And please make sure that the to function on is set to all panelists and attendees so everyone can see what you're writing. And me and Alex will pick out any questions to ask Tereza as we go along. And just remember that the webinar is being recorded. And you'll be able to find the recording of the webinar in the webinars article in your campaign dashboard. Go to the next slide. I will just quickly cover again, just a reminder of the basics of the Christmas challenge. It's launches on Giving Tuesday. You can go to your campaign dashboard to access any resources, and the time to get marketing is right about now, really. So you should be thinking about marketing about social media, which I'm glad you've all joined us today for that. Just a quick reminder of how the campaign match funding works is that the first set of donations you receive during the Christmas challenge will be matched by pledges. In this example we have here is £3,000. Once that pledge money has been exhausted, any charities that have been allocated champion funding, the next set of donations they receive during the Christmas challenge week will then be matched by champions. So really it may be worth thinking about for the campaign about focusing on first setting a smaller target of using up your pledge funds first, and then thinking about your bigger target of getting to your total fundraising target for the campaign. With that all said and done, I will now hand over to Tereza to deliver actual content.
Perfect. Thanks so much. So today we're going to talk about the use of social media as part of the Christmas challenge and look at some specific ideas around all the social media platforms and how to use them during the week and before actually the week of the Christmas challenge. So some ideas, first of all, how can we use social media as part of the campaign? So the starting point is probably to announce your participation. You want to make sure that your supporters and all those who follow you on different social media channels, they know about the campaign beforehand, so that they are ready during that week to be able to support you. And of course, you also want to build the momentum to make sure that you start talking about the campaign beforehand so that you prepare the ground for the specific week. And then, of course, you want to engage your supporters. You want to start the relationship, or if you already have a relationship with them, to start and make sure that they do stay engaged throughout the campaign, both about the short term and also the longer term. And of course, we know we want to encourage the donations. We want to make the ask and guide them all to your page and make sure you make the most of the Christmas challenge. So then during that week, you can also share frequent updates on the progress on your social media channels. And the best thing really about social media is that it gives you the options to tell really great stories. You can really engage your supporters, or if someone is a new follower, you can really help them to be part of a journey by all the work you've been doing and how they can really find out more and support you. So we'll start a little bit on the power of storytelling and how you can really make the most of it on social media. So storytelling is important. Stories are actually everywhere. Sometimes we feel that we're not really sure how we can tell a story or where to find a new story, but actually it's true, stories are everywhere. We just need to start thinking, where is a new opportunity to find a story? How can I just use an everyday opportunity, for example, a photo with our team or just having a chat with our volunteers and turn that into an actual story? So social media, of course, is probably the best channel to develop your storytelling skills because you can share more posts, you can actually experiment with different ideas, or you can pick a specific channel that makes more sense for you. And it's interesting to consider that 32% of donors are actually more inspired to give through social media. So it goes back again to the importance of telling the right story to connect with them, to be able to encourage them to proceed to the donations. So when we're thinking about storytelling and building our storytelling skills, you might want to start with the archetype actually of telling a story. So you want to make sure that any story that you're telling is having the beginning, the middle, and the ending. So you want to start with a hook, something that grabs their attention. Maybe it's a fact, maybe it's something that is really appealing, or maybe a very sad situation and a challenge. And then you want to progress. You explain the problem, the obstacles, the challenge that you're facing. You want to go through the middle way to say, this is where we are. This is what we want to work on. And of course, the ending, you need to have some sort of a look at the future. This is what I want to achieve. Or with your support, there is a resolution. This is what we have already achieved. So it's kind of a simple way to think of our storytelling mindset and how we can really have the framework in mind every time we say we have some sort of story. So of course, the stories should be about the impact. We need to be able to find the sweet spot between what our charity wants to tell the donor. So of course, you want to talk about your mission, your work, how you're approaching the specific challenge. And then of course, you also want to consider, what do the donors really need to hear from you? They probably want to know how their contribution is really paying off, how they're special, what you're doing for them to acknowledge their support. So in other words, you just want to make sure that you combine your mission with their contribution. And that sweet spot is being able to say, this is how we help solve the problem with the help of your contributions. And working on the impact, of course, is very important and it's very useful. So when you combine the importance of sharing the impact with the storytelling skills or using the right emotions, then this is pretty much the success on how you get more from fundraising and of course, the number of donations. So pretty much you want to combine the storytelling with action. It's important to find the right emotion to appeal in a way that your supporters feel connected. So you might start with a sad element in terms of the current situation, or you might want to tap into a more hopeful emotion. And I feel like this year, this might work even better because we know that all the negative stories that we're reading right now. So if you're able to tap into some sort of hope about the future on how you can make things a little bit better or why their contribution is important, then that might actually work very well. So it's important to tell good stories in a sense of being effective. And when we talk about effective stories, they have to lead to some sort of action. So you want to tell a great story that connects, of course, the head to the heart, but then you also want to have a link, for example, to your page for the donation. So you want to make sure that there is always an action because it's not just about the story. You want to also be able to have an end result. So now we're going to look at all the different channels and how to make the most of them. So we'll talk about Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And we're starting with Facebook, of course. So Facebook is obviously the most popular social media platform. Most of us probably have a Facebook account, whether it's for personal or professional reasons. And we know that we use Facebook most of the time to connect with family and friends. So in that way, it's more of a personal social platform, but that doesn't mean that you can also use it for your organization or building a community. And of course, when we're talking about Facebook, especially the last couple of years, it's also important to acknowledge that there is a whole controversy around ethics and advertising, or also the spread of misinformation. So I remember, for example, there were a few charities the last few months that they were talking more about the ethics, whether they should use Facebook. But that's obviously a bigger conversation, that there is the challenge that it is the most popular social media platform. And we just need to acknowledge all the different parts of it. So let's look at different ideas on how to use Facebook and be more effective, really. So obviously, visual content is very powerful. And when we're talking about storytelling and planning your campaign, it's really a great way to tell your story in a more appealing way. So as you can see, this is the example from Charity Water. Instead of just sharing the text and telling a long story, you also want to make sure that the images are relevant to what you're talking about. You might want to use images, videos, and of course, combine them with the context that makes sense, that they're able to connect your supporter with your cause. And it's interesting that lately Facebook is favoring the videos even more. So that means that having a series of photos is great and it works really well. But in terms of the Facebook algorithm, they tend to like the videos that fit to the guidelines that they have in mind. So if you have a video that's around 1 to 3 minutes, this is perfect for Facebook, because they want to make sure that they encourage more video storytelling skills in general. And Facebook also really wants you to focus on engagement. Ideally, they don't want, and in terms of the algorithm, they don't want you to just be passive. They want to encourage you, if you like a post, to be able to show that. Whether you like, you share, you comment, this is any sort of engagement that you can get. And in terms of your organization, that means that it's good to create content that leads to some sort of action. You might want to ask a question. You might want to really create good content that is just effortless to share it. Or you want to make it from time to time a little bit more casual. You want to thank your supporters. You might share posts that they just like them enough to instantly share them. And this is a great indication for Facebook that the page worked really well. If your supporters like the content and they feel that this is interesting for me, then they have more chances to engage again in the future. And another thing that works really well on Facebook is video streaming in terms of going live. So it's interesting that live videos are 3 times more engaging than other videos. And of course, it's a great way to connect with your audience. You're more genuine. And sometimes you're more authentic. You don't necessarily have to plan everything in advance. You might want to go live with a volunteer, with someone who supports your campaign, or even just going live with your team. We know that especially this year, having some sort of connection with our audience is very important. So you might want, for example, during the week of the Christmas challenge, to plan an interview or a live update of how your campaign is doing. And it could be even 10, 20 minutes. It doesn't have to be a very long live streaming. So have a think if it makes sense with your campaign, or if there's someone in the team who might want to try it out. It's definitely a good idea if you want to be active on Facebook. And you might also want to consider using Facebook ads, so investing more in advertising for Facebook. And it's a really great way to use it, for example, to talk about your campaign, to promote it and let your supporters know that this is actually happening at the first week of December. You might want to find new volunteers, appeal to new donors based on their interests, and try to experiment with some ideas around the copy, the images, or the call to action. So the good thing with Facebook ads is that you don't necessarily need to have the big budget. You can try, for example, with 10 or 20 pounds and still reach a good number of people who could be interested in your cause. Or you can also try to boost your Facebook posts. If you post something that goes well on your page, you might want to boost it even for 5 to 10 pounds just to expand the reach and possibly find more people who are interested in this. And something that we need to mention when it comes to the Christmas challenge is that although technically you are able in general to create Facebook ads using the Facebook pixel, in that case, you can't add a Facebook pixel to the big give page, which means that you can't run a campaign that reaches your visitors from your page in the past, because it has to be linked with your specific page. So since now you're leading everyone to the big give page, this wouldn't be possible. But if you're still interested in giving this a try, or if you feel that Facebook ads work really well for me, you might want to run an awareness campaign before that week and lead them to your website and then get them to follow the next steps to go to the Christmas challenge page. And another thing that's also very useful on Facebook, if you go to your Facebook page and you click on Insights, looking at the posts, you might also want to look at the best time to post. So this is the time when they analyze all your posts from the past, and they look at the times that your supporters engage the most with you, or even the days. So this is very helpful because when you schedule your content, you know that, for example, on Wednesdays from 7 to 10 o'clock in the afternoon, then this is the best time to engage, because in the past, this was my highest engagement. Or there might be a specific day. You might feel that the weekend actually works better for me because people are spending more time on their phone. So it's definitely useful to have a look at this and find more about your audience, understand at the best times that they interact with you, and use it for your benefit. So in terms of the posting frequency and how often should you really post on Facebook, I think it's definitely important to aim for quality over quantity. Facebook is focusing a lot on engagement. So if you share too many posts that don't necessarily have any engagement, then this is a signal for Facebook that you're not having much of activity on your page. So it's probably better to aim for 2 to 3 posts a week on a regular week. And of course, you can increase that with a few more posts during the Christmas challenge. So have a think of the posts that make more sense for your audience, and they would probably have an average, a good number of engagement, and try to aim for that number. It's probably a good starting point to go with 2 or 3 posts per week. So time to have a pause and hear any questions from you around Facebook. And feel free to tell us more. How do you use Facebook, or what is a specific challenge you might be facing?
Thanks, Teresa. We've had a couple of questions on Facebook. So the first one, I think you had a wheel of emotions in the early slides just before the Facebook section started. Mark Smith was asking, are you suggesting that those colors on the wheel generate those emotions?
So the colors, let me go back again. Yeah, there was a scientific research around that, and I'm happy to share the link afterwards. They say that sometimes the specific color can be associated with these emotions, but I'm sure that it's not definite, because looking at the colors now, for example, red is not just about the anger and the rage. It can also be about passion, so on the other side of the spectrum. So it's just an indication, but I think it's all more about understanding all the different ranges of emotions and how you can use them.
Answering that. We had another question from Lorna about boosting. She heard recently that it has limited use and it's better to spend money on ads rather than boosts. Boosts are only seen by those who are online at the time, whereas ads are totally targeted. Is that true?
Yes, I think in general, if you have a little bit more time or you want to understand a little bit more about Facebook ads, it's definitely better to aim for Facebook ads compared to boosting. But there's also the advantage for boosting, and I know that many charities prefer it because it's way easier. So instead of just going into all the demographics, who you want to target, and the few extra steps, it's kind of an easy way to just do 1, 2, 3 steps and then boost your post. But most of the times, it's more about those who already engage with your page to get more results. So there are many courses from Facebook, actually, if you want to try more for Facebook ads in order to be guided to the next steps.
Great. And Davina Kerry Evans asks, are Facebook groups important? Would you place any emphasis on them?
Yes, that's actually a really good question. And I think it's a really good way to make the most of Facebook because they really pay more attention on groups the last couple of years. And I think especially this year with the way things are not able to go on like physical events, it's really a great way to bring your community together. Some charities have only one group that is a general one and everyone can join about the supporters, the beneficiaries, or others are really creating smaller versions of them. You might have local branches. You might want to have one for volunteers, one for your ambassadors, one for your team. So it's a good idea to start thinking, how can I build a community of those who are more active or who might want to learn more about my campaign and start some conversations there.
Is there a best length for Facebook Live advertising? Sorry, Facebook Live, sorry.
I don't think there's a specific time that you have to aim for, but I think usually the averages are around half an hour from what I've seen.
Great. And a final question, Petra Aston, how many posts would you suggest for the campaign per day?
For the Big Give Challenge?
Yeah, during the campaign week.
I think it's totally okay this week to aim for more posts because usually when we run a campaign, I think the supporters expect this to be a little busier. So as long as you announce it beforehand and you say this is what's coming up, make sure you keep an eye on our page because it's going to be with lots of updates and progress and stories. So I think you can definitely go with even double the numbers. So it's totally fine to go for 5, 6, 7 posts during the week.
Just wanted to let people know that if I'm not asking your question to Tereza now, I'll answer it because I'll be able to answer it. Or it's already been covered, just answer it in the Q&A. And a final, actually, one more question, which is actually quite interesting, is Rebecca Hughes says that they've not used Facebook Live within the charity, but they're more comfortable using Zoom. And she says you can link Zoom to Facebook Live. Is this effective, or does Facebook penalize you for using third-party software?
It's a really good question. No, I've actually seen that in many cases. If you are using Zoom already, it's actually a nice trick so that you make sure that more people are checking your video live. So you just use Zoom, you have the call, the webinar, the meeting, and you also make sure you click on go live on Facebook. So it's a really good idea.
We've had a couple of questions just clarifying the Facebook pixel issue. I'll just clarify that is that we can't install Facebook pixels on your Big Give campaign pages, so you can't track how your ad is performing. So if you still want to use Facebook ads, what we recommend is you create a landing page on your own website, and that links to your Christmas challenge campaign page on the Big Give website, and you install your Facebook pixel on that landing page on your own website, so then you still are able to track how your ads are performing. But yeah, please let me know if you still have any further questions about that. I think that's all of the questions I'll have.
Perfect. And of course, we'll have more time in the end if you need anything else. So now time to focus on Twitter. So Twitter is useful when you want to have a quick way to stay up to date with what's happening in the world, and all the trending topics, all the things that are coming up are always probably showing up first on Twitter. And of course, it's also a little bit challenging this year. So it's definitely something to consider in terms of moderation. And the thing with Twitter that makes it different is that you only have 280 characters per tweet. So you have to be brief, you have to be as clear as possible, and trying to get into the context of the story in a different way than you would use other channels. And also Twitter is great if you want to join awareness days, if you want to engage with your supporters, to be a little bit more casual, or also if you want to do outreach to find, for example, journalists who might be looking for a story, or someone you might want to get in touch with and they use the channel more. So a good way to use Twitter is definitely, again, to focus on the visual aspect of things. Images and GIFs are very popular on Twitter. And it's interesting to consider that tweets with images receive 150% more retweets. And it kind of makes sense because if you don't add any visual element and it's just the text, then the amount of space it takes on your feed when you're just scrolling, it's only a tiny bit compared to having the image, as you can see the example. And it takes more space on the feed, and that means it has more chances for someone to notice this. And then if you pay attention to the actual visual content that you're using, it can be very powerful and very engaging. So if you think, for example, the Children's Society screenshot that we're having here, it's a way to campaign about free school meals. So instead of just adding text and share everything at the tweet, which of course you have the limitation, you're not able to add all the details, you create 4 images, you add more details, and then it looks like one grid of a photo. So it's a really clever way to make the most of Twitter and how you can engage your supporters. Of course, it's important on Twitter to use hashtags, and in a specific case, you definitely want to make sure you use on all your tweets the hashtag Christmas Challenge 20. This is a great way to connect all your posts, but also for someone else, when they click on the hashtag, they're able to find all your posts. And also for the Big Give team, if they want to support your campaign and retweet you, it's a really easy way to just click again on the hashtag and find all your tweets. You might also want to use your own hashtags if you want to have an additional one, and think then what makes sense for your organization. But also make sure that you don't add too many hashtags. Again, there's the limitation of the characters. So if you have, for example, 5 hashtags, it means that you're not able to add a lot of text. So probably better to aim for 2 or maximum 3 hashtags, but definitely the most important one is Christmas Challenge 20. And when it comes to hashtags, it's also important to remember that they have to be accessible. You need to make sure that you reach as many people as possible. So, for example, you want to make sure that you capitalize every word so that it's easier for everyone to read, even if they're using a screen reader. So it's always good to remember that. And it's more of a conversation lately on making sure that our posts are more accessible. And something else to make the most of Twitter is a great opportunity to engage more with your supporters. You might want to be more social. So don't be afraid to ask more questions, to be a little bit more playful, or use Twitter to start understanding more your supporters. So those who engage more with you, you might want to have a look at their profiles to see that the things they're interested in. It gives you a really good idea on how to connect with them, how to understand the best way to say the right words and the right stories for them. Something else that's also useful on Twitter, you might notice when you click on retweet, there is the option to add a comment as part of that. So instead of just retweeting something that you like, there is the option of the quote retweet, which is just a really clever way to show that you agree with something or you want to share it, but you also want to add your own voice. So you might use it, for example, as part of the campaign to thank your supporters. You might want to thank your sponsors, to get your volunteers across on your own feed. And again, even if it's just a couple of sentences, it's a really great way to show that you're not just passively retweeting something, but you're also adding your own voice. In terms of the posting frequency, Twitter doesn't really have a set number that you need to aim for. It's good that things change really fast and nothing lasts for too much on our news feeds. So there is a challenge between saying the right things that you have in mind and also trying to split your posts throughout the day. So it's totally fine, especially during the week of the Christmas challenge, to share even 10 tweets a day, if you feel that, of course, you have the capacity. But even 3 or 4 during the day is definitely fine. And make sure you probably try and balance them. For example, share one in the morning, one during the lunchtime when someone is a little bit off work and they might check their own channels, and maybe one towards the end of the work and one in the evening. So you want to start comparing the different times to see what works best for you and what's the right time for you from now on. And another thing to consider in terms of Twitter is you don't want to post too many identical tweets so that they're exactly the same. Because first of all, they look repetitive. So your supporters might feel that I'm not really engaging. I think I've seen that before. But also it's Twitter that might view the content as spam. The case is that there are many bots that might just share the same thing over and over. If they feel that I'm not sure if your content is actually genuine, you might be a bot. So there might be an initial check if you post the same thing, let's say 10 to 20 times. So you might want to make even a tiny bit of a tweak from one post to another to make sure that you don't look as spam. So time for questions around Twitter and any challenges you might be facing.
We'll start with a couple of questions. One's just come in. Would you recommend that we change the messaging when posting on Twitter when compared to Facebook, or are audiences very similar?
It's a really good question. I think you probably have to change the messaging, first of all, for the length of the message, because there is a limitation of 280 characters, and that also includes the link. Then you might feel that I don't have the same length on Facebook because I don't have this limitation. So it's probably good to think, how can I be a little bit brief, relevant, and also staying on the topic? So you might want to be a little bit more direct. You add context, a couple of sentences, then you make sure you include the hashtag and you add the ask for the action. So you might say, donate here, join us today, here is how to support us. So the ending is always very clear, and you want to make sure that there is a very easy ask.
We have a question, maybe this one's for us, Amber. Do you have any social assets or templates we can use for our channels, for example, countdown assets or big GIFs? We will be, we're in the middle of creating some social media assets that charities can use. We will let you know when they are available, but we hope to have some assets available for charities to use. So please keep an eye out for any emails from us about that. Lorna has a question. Can we pretty much assume everyone only checks Twitter on their phone? I assume this may be about how tweets are displayed. Is that what we're asking Lorna about? Tereza, do you have an opinion on that?
I think that's a really good point. I think we assume that most people use Twitter on their phone. I think for me, for example, because obviously as a social media manager, I need to have it on my laptop. But I think if it's not part of your job, chances are you're only checking it on the phone. And that's why Twitter is very quick and very interactive, because it's usually about scrolling on the phone. So that also means that you want to make sure, again, to consider the screen and how it's displayed on the phone, or how the image could look like.
Alex Roberts asks, is there an algorithm for Twitter like Facebook?
Technically there is, but I think it's not as annoying as Facebook because we don't really talk about this. I think it's more about the algorithm for them to make sure that they try to control a little bit the misinformation or the spam. So they have become a little bit stricter on that, but I don't think it's something to worry, of course, as much as Facebook.
I think we had some questions about Hootsuite last time. I'm just trying to find those questions. Yes, what tools should we use to maximize our Twitter use? What can we use to generate tweets for our supporters, monitoring our Twitter activity? Do you have any particular recommendations?
So obviously the disclaimer is a work for Lightful, so I have to mention that we have the social media tool that is also free for Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. But also, of course, there are many other tools. There is TweetDeck, which is directly from Twitter. And I like it in terms of monitoring, because you can just add a hashtag and keep track of everything that's happening instead of just schedule what's happening. And of course, there's Hootsuite, there's Buffer, there's Proud Social. I think it depends on what you like in terms of the functionality and possibly your budget.
And we had a question. Is there anything around when certain types of content work best, i.e. video in the evening, because people are able to watch / can't watch your video during working hours?
I think that's true. And it's interesting how things also changed now with our working habits. So for example, last year, we used to say that Twitter is very effective at 8 or 9 o'clock because it's when you're commuting. So this is the time that you're probably on your phone or you have more time. But obviously this changed now, and they say that this year it's more effective to actually post during lunch hour, because that's the time you want to have a break and you might want to use your phone. So it's interesting to see how 1 year can really change our habits, and we need to adjust our content.
Yeah, that's very true about how we've sort of changed how we work and how we use social media in the day. I think that's all the questions for now. So I'll let you get back to it.
So now it's time for LinkedIn. And I think it's probably a network that we don't talk much about compared to the others, but it can still be quite powerful. So it's obviously more of a professional network. It's when you use it for personal reasons to connect with others in your industry. You might want to use it to find a job or just to be able to show more of your professional self. So it's not like Facebook, for example, you don't usually use it to connect with family and friends. And it has more of a specific use, which is also, it can be very useful. So in terms of your organization, it's good to share your updates. You can use it more when you want to involve your corporate partners, talk about your campaign. And the great thing is it can also be great when you want to bring the team together. So LinkedIn is all about the network. The network is those that you're following. They're your connections. When you, in the way we say with Facebook, you have a friend request and you add someone as a friend. On LinkedIn, you say you're adding a connection. So then the interesting thing with LinkedIn is that you add a connection and then you see the level of connections we have with others. You might find someone that could be interesting for you to follow, and you see that you have a third level of connection. That means that you know someone who knows someone. So it's an interesting way when you want to think of more of networking, and it's pretty much a way of virtual networking, especially nowadays when we're not attending conferences and we need to feel that we still want to have some sort of connection. The best way to use LinkedIn is really try to get your team to be your brand ambassadors. The first thing is that when someone says, I'm working for this organization, you already become a brand ambassador. So you want to make sure when you're about to launch your campaign that your team is on board and they use their own profiles to actually connect more with their own network. So it's not just you, for example, using your page. You also want them to feel that they're part of the campaign. So that means that they want to share it on their own. So they're reaching their own network, and that expands your reach even more. So it's more about trying to encourage your team and be more transparent with what you're working on, or maybe start on your own. Try to use your own personal LinkedIn profile to share what you're working on, what your organization is up to. And if you are excited about, feel free to share that, because it shows that you're also doing well in terms of your professional work, but you're also promoting your organization. And something interesting with LinkedIn is that they're really trying lately to embrace rich media, all sorts of visual content. So images work very well, but actually videos are the best ones on LinkedIn the last year or so. So they want to make it more about storytelling, and they're actually encouraging you to try and repurpose your content. You might have a blog post and you just share it as a link, but then you might realize that actually I might create an image and share a quote from that blog. Then I might want to turn that into a video and share some tips. Or I might want to turn them into a presentation and add it on SlideShare. So LinkedIn in general wants you to understand that it's not necessarily about creating new content. It's more about understanding how can I make the most of what I have and use it in many different ways to be more creative. So in terms of the posting frequency, you don't necessarily need to be as active as other channels. It really depends on your content. I think what I've seen from most pages, they tend to post probably once a week if you have an active page. But if you want to be more active and you feel it makes sense for you, feel free to try more and aim for 2 or 3 posts per week. And in terms of the best time to post, again, we need to consider how someone uses the platform. There's no commuting anymore when we say that in peak commuting times, you need to aim for early in the morning. But it's still a little bit accurate on LinkedIn to consider that the more senior the person, the earlier or later they check their feeds, because they're busy throughout the day. So it's usually at the start or the end of the day. And it's interesting with LinkedIn, it also works very well on the weekend, because we tend to focus more on the weekdays, and that means there's less competition actually at the weekend. So any questions specifically on LinkedIn, anything that you would like to try?
We have had one question so far. So this attendee has said, our comms team aren't keen on promoting fundraising campaigns on LinkedIn because they want to use it more as thought leadership? Have you got any advice for getting them to see value in sharing fundraising appeal on LinkedIn?
I think that's a really good point, and it's actually quite common to use sometimes LinkedIn for thought leadership. But you might want to say that it doesn't have to be all the time, but for example, during the Christmas challenge, you might still want to combine the thought leadership with the direct results and the action. So if it's an important campaign for you, you might want to think, how can I get the senior team, for example, the thought leaders, to talk about the campaign? So even if it's not talking directly on your page, they might want to share on their own profiles. So it's still important for you to amplify your campaign, even if it's just through the personal networks.
And I think we had a couple of cases last year where charities, they didn't really have any business connections, but they promoted a campaign over LinkedIn and had donations during the campaign week from businesses. So that's also a type of donor audience that you shouldn't forget.
And another thing that's good with LinkedIn is actually the content stays longer on the feed. So you might post something on Monday, and if it starts getting good engagement, they might still be able to see that on Thursday. So it's kind of perfect in that way for the specific week.
And Helen Isons asks, can our trustees be listed similar to how employees are listed as part of the organization?
Yes, that's also a really good point. They might also be able to add it on their feed and say, I'm a trustee, or any sort of connection you might be having. And it's really, again, a great case to be your own ambassador.
And should charities ask their staff and network to share their LinkedIn post or share posts from their charities to increase engagement and boost the post?
I think it's definitely worth the effort. And I know that it's not always easy, because we're also seeing that from our case, not everyone loves using social media, but some of them are active. So we try to engage with those who are willing to share that and remind them on the important messages in the campaigns to share at least one post.
Yeah, I think that's all the questions we've had so far on LinkedIn. So yeah, hand it back to you.
Perfect. And now it's time to talk about Instagram. So Instagram obviously has become very popular the last few years, and it's a very visual and engaging social platform. There is a growing audience that uses Instagram, and it's obviously a great way to reach the younger generation, but it's actually not just about the younger generation nowadays. The demographics are really changing, and it's probably the growing social media platform that we might want to think in terms of visual content. So again, you have to explore visual content and you need to be able to tell stories. But I feel like it's probably the channel that a growing number of charities used the last year. There were many actual accounts that were created the last year, which signals that it is a channel that we want to explore more. So the first thing I would say in terms of Instagram, there is one simple setting when you're starting, and you go to your settings and you change your profile from personal to business. So by accessing a business profile, you just having access to more in terms of analytics. You want to track your impressions, your reach, your visits, or even your website clicks. And then you also see your best performing posts. So analytics are definitely not in the same level as Facebook. They're very basic yet, but it's still good to have any sort of indication on what's working and how you can really improve your profile. So of course, you want to make sure that on LinkedIn, you create appealing content. It's all about the images and the videos. And you want to make sure that everything you're sharing makes sense for what you want to share in general about your organization. You definitely want to use hashtags. And again, you want to make sure you use the hashtag Christmas Challenge 20. It's an easy way for someone to discover all the posts, to share them on their profile, or to be featured again, for example, on other accounts. So in terms of hashtags, you can use them in a more generous way compared to other channels. So I think the limit is around 20 or 50 hashtags in general, but we tend to recommend around 5 to 10 on a post, because it can get quite a long text and you want to focus on the one that makes more sense for you. But again, if you want to use more, there is no penalty from Instagram. You can add even more. The good thing is that they are searchable. So you might want to think for the hashtags that make more sense for your organization. You might want to start with some general ones and start being more specific. And you might want to also create a hashtag for your organization, a bespoke one. That's a specific event, a challenge, a campaign. And it's a great way to be more creative, really. So when we're saying looking more into hashtags and being searchable, this is an example of how it looks like when you search for hashtags. So for example, you might want to think what makes more sense for my organization. So you go on the search, you might want to type charity, and you get all the different variations of the hashtags that you can use. So of course, the hashtag charity might be popular, which is great, but that means that you also have more competition. So you might want to be a little bit more specific. And these are some examples. You might want to use charity event, charity campaign, charity shop. So depending on what you want to talk about, you can get a little bit more specific to reach those who are actually interested in that. And of course, and especially during a campaign, it's all about telling the stories. You want to make sure you use Instagram's visual appeal to think, how can I really tell a story mostly through my visual content? And then as additional focus on the caption. So when you think of the caption, you want to make sure that you share the context, you add more details. And it's actually interesting that long captions, when they just supplement the story, they make the post perform even better because you share a powerful photo, something that's engaging, something that even might be funny, and then you explain more into the context. So in terms of stories, you might want to share the impact, you might want to share everyday moments, talk about the staff, the volunteers, or address challenges. And for the cases that you don't always have a new photo, you might want to play around, for example, with quotes, with adding some tips and trying to use tools like Canva when you can be creative without necessarily being a designer. Something that's also interesting on Instagram, it's also focusing on consistency. So you might look sometimes on the news feeds on Instagram when they're just having a very visual appeal. So that might be consistency in terms of the visuals. You might want to think of your brand, how you showcase your logo, if you have specific content and ideas that you can share. And you might also want to be consistent with your tone of voice. You might want to choose, do I want to be more formal, casual? Do I want to be more caring and sympathetic? So it's definitely important, especially as you build your content and if you are in the beginning, to try and think what consistency looks like to you. And something that's also really nice on Instagram, and I think it works well also with the Christmas challenge, your story doesn't necessarily have to be just one post. You can start narrating your story and then proceed through the next posts, or you can use a series of images, so the carousel post that goes through the journey of the story. So think of that week as an opportunity to build a narrative with different stories and how they can really link together somehow. And of course, Instagram stories are very creative, they're very engaging, and they're also very fun, they're very interactive. So we see that more and more people consume many Instagram stories, and there are many charities who actually make the most of them because you can be more authentic. You don't necessarily need to plan the content too much. You don't need to be a designer. And it might also be a great opportunity to connect more with your supporters. So we see, for example, many charities use stickers, they ask questions, they host Q&As. You might want to use Instagram stories for a takeover from a volunteer, a beneficiary, or someone from your team. And it's a great way, again, to tell a story. You might want to use multiple stories to share a different angle in your narrative on a different day. And the fact that they only last 24 hours, it means that it doesn't have to be perfect. You can try as many things as you want. So time to answer more questions around Instagram. If you have something specific I can help you with.
Yeah, thanks, Teresa. We have had actually quite a few questions on Instagram, so I'll get cracking. Do you get penalized for using over 11 hashtags and being closer to the 30 limit?
No, there's definitely not a penalty on that. So you can use technically even up to 50. But I think there was a post that was saying a few months ago that it's probably better to aim for an average to have a balance. Because if you share too many hashtags, they might feel, for example, your supporters, that you're just trying way too hard. to tap into different hashtags. So as long as they make sense for your organization, they're relevant, you can still use more for sure.
Great. And do you have a recommendation on how often you should be posting per day or even per week?
Good question. So on Instagram, there isn't like a set way to approach that. It really depends on the images and the content that you have. Sometimes for some organizations find it very hard to find the right content. So it's totally okay to post, let's say, a couple of times a week. But if you feel that you have a lot of content, and especially during the Christmas challenge campaign, I would say try to post more. So you can aim for 3-4 posts, but also you can play around more with stories. They only last one day, and you can use them as much as you can, of course.
We've had a couple of questions about hashtags and comments. Someone said they've seen a lot of people post hashtags in the comment rather than the post itself to keep them separate. Is there an impact on doing this?
So there was a conversation on that for a couple of years now, and there was always a controversy, like everyone was trying to decide which one is better. But I think there was a research that said that actually that doesn't really make a change. It's more about the formatting, whether you prefer to have the hashtags right after your content or if you want to keep them separate. But I think that doesn't really make a difference. That's why we still see that many people use them differently.
Someone has said that they know that Facebook isn't keen on images that have lots of text. Based on the examples in that slide, I think, is it the same for Instagram, or are text only posts okay?
So it's interesting. Instagram works really well when you have more text. So it's probably not the algorithm how it works on Facebook, because I've seen some really great examples of storytelling when they really have a long caption. And because it helps you like spend more time, then you look at the image, it grabs your attention, but then you're able to understand the story more. So it definitely works better than Facebook on that.
That's quite surprising. Someone said, asking, what's the difference between stories and reels, and when should we use each to maximize impact?
Good point. So reels were introduced a couple of months ago on Instagram, and it was pretty much an attempt to copy TikTok, as obvious as it can. And the difference is just a little bit on the effects. So you're able to use it in a more playful way and just to use a couple of different effects. But in the essence, it's pretty much the same how you use it. But I think the way reels would work out at some point, that they might have a different way to show them. So now you can find them also in the Discover section. And I know that Instagram really wants to make you to use them more. So it's still a little bit of an experimental stage, but it might be good to play around, just familiarize yourself more with them.
We do have quite a few questions, but I'll just ask one more and then I'll get back to the presentation. Where do you access the analytics for Instagram?
So you go on the settings and it has an option. Let me show you again the specific slide. And I'm happy to share more. So when you go on the profile, on your own profile, you click on the settings and it should be on the analytics. Let me show you. I think you click on the account and then you pick go explore the business profile. So have a look at the settings. It should be easy to find, and it's just one step really, and it's very useful.
Great. Yeah, we do have some more questions coming in, but I'll let you get back to the presentation. We can ask them.
So it's time anyway. Oh yeah, just the takeaways, and of course we'll go back to the Q&A. So just one slide really. With everything that we've discussed and all the different ways to approach social media and storytelling, I think what we should keep for now until the next steps is think that you want to use social media to amplify your message. Have a think of the stories that you want to tell for the Christmas Challenge campaign, how they can be linked, and find the right channels that make more sense for every story, or the different approach to use different channels. So after all, the goal is to connect with your supporters and your donors. You want to get them to engage with you, to feel that what you're sharing can actually make a change, and they want to make sure that they're part of this journey. So start with the channels that you're currently active. Don't try too many channels if you feel that I don't really have the time. Think of what's relevant for you and your audience, of course, and take it from there. See what's working best, see the channels that are more engaging, and try to focus more on them. So feel free to try new ideas, experiment with all the different trends and the things we've discussed, but also make sure that you find a way on the things that work best for you, and you try to copy that as much as possible on the next stages. So time for more questions and anything that you might want to ask really around this.
We still have quite a few social media questions. I know some people have asked more general questions about the Christmas challenge itself. So if you do have more questions about the platform or the Christmas challenge itself, please email us and we'll be happy to answer. We'll try and focus on the social media questions for now. Alex Hendon has asked, can you schedule Instagram stories in Hootsuite?
I think you can schedule Instagram stories. I'm not sure if there are any specific Instagram tools, but it's still, I think, an area that is not really much discovered. And I think it's probably because stories have to be really more authentic. So there are not many tools yet, or there might not be any tool that gets you to schedule stories.
We've had someone say they've seen a lot of people post a story that says new post to encourage people to look at these posts. Is that worthwhile?
Yeah, that's actually working well because there are more chances for someone to see your stories compared to your newsfeed. So sometimes they want to make sure they grab their attention and they find this by going first with the story and then exploring the feed.
Someone else, can you please put the previous slide up again with the key takeaways?
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, just trying to pick out any question. Is it true that a story can only be 15 seconds long on Instagram?
So the story, yes, when we're thinking of Instagram stories, they're only 15 seconds long, but we've seen many charities, for example, they might have a longer video. They just share it on multiple stories. So you don't need to do any editing. If you share a video and it's like 1 minute long, Instagram is cutting it into smaller chunks on its own. So you just upload it and it's like 5 stories, for example.
Someone's asking about Facebook. Is it worth asking supporters and volunteers to share within their groups and forums?
Yes, that's actually a great idea. And I think it's really the best way to make the most of Facebook. You want to try and tap into your community. So you want to inspire them enough with your posts that they instantly feel the need to share it on their own network. So you can even ask it directly if you feel like this would make a change. You inspire them enough to proceed to the next steps. So that would be ideal, really.
I think that's also quite low hanging fruit. It's very easy to do, very quick for people to do as well. So it's definitely not worth, definitely no harm in asking volunteers and people, your supporters to do that. Is there one channel that is known to lead to more donations, or is there no research in that? Has there been any research about?
I think it really depends on your own active channels as a start. But then, of course, it is also linked to how the channels work. For example, I don't think that Twitter would be the first option in terms of fundraising to get direct donations. But it might be able, for example, to grab their attention on that moment, to post something engaging, and then, of course, to be the second stage towards the donation. I think it's, again, starting on your most popular channel. What is the channel that gets more clicks and more engagement for you? And then it also depends on the type of fundraising. So if you just want to lead them to a page, like in that campaign, then of course you can use any channel. But if it had to do more about using the Facebook donate button compared to the Instagram donate button, which is a different focus, then that would be more about a different kind of donations and how you fundraise. But I think when you have to lead to a website and a web page, then it gets to the same result. You want to use the one that's more active for you.
I think, yeah, that's a good point. I think someone's also asked that is, can you link the Facebook donation to the campaign page? Unfortunately, you can't. So you need to direct donors to your Big Gift campaign page for them to make a donation. I'm going to paraphrase Elizabeth's question. Is going to be, is there a certain type of content that you recommend? Should all posts on social media be uplifting? Or is there any type of content that you wouldn't recommend? Or for example, on Instagram, should everything be like sort of uplifting, inspirational?
I think it's probably good to have a balance. And of course, you don't want to have all the positive posts that get you to a point that I feel that I'm not feeling positive. I can really relate to that. But you also don't want to be sad on every post, because I think everyone feels all the negative stories and the impact of them right now. So you want to acknowledge the situation. And sometimes the messaging that worked best this year is trying to show in a genuine way that you really want to dream of a better world. You really want to make a change. Even small acts and some small contributions can really help. So you don't want to go over generalizing, like let's make everything positive or everything is negative. It's more about finding the balance in that way.
Yeah, and I've managed to find that Hootsuite's question, which I was referring to previously, is does anyone find Hootsuite doesn't perform well in the algorithm these days, and do they have any alternative suggestions? They like the advantage of scheduling multiple posts at once, but they're worried about the engagement isn't as strong as it could be. Is there any issues? I don't know if you've experienced any issues with Hootsuite, Tereza.
I haven't noticed that, to be honest. I think there was a conversation the last couple of years whether the scheduling tools are affected by the algorithm, for example, on Facebook. And there was a report, I think it was from Buffer, that said that actually compared to the research, there wasn't a change on the impact. But again, it depends on Facebook and how they decide at some point to feel like if they prefer you to go natively scheduling or if it's still okay to use scheduling tools. But I think for now, there shouldn't be a change.
And should charities ask influencers, celebs that they have to link to posts on social for them? How can they engage with influencers and celebs?
Yes, I think it's probably good to have some sort of research first. So instead of just reaching all the celebrities that you can think, is there someone who might have some sort of affinity with your cause? Is there someone who might be passionate? For example, someone talking about mental health. So your mental health organization feels perfect to talk about the specific message. So try to do a little bit of research without spending too much time and think of those who have more chances to connect with you and share your message. And what's also interesting is that you don't necessarily need to just aim for the really big celebrities. There might be someone with 20,000 followers, especially on Instagram. There are many sort of like micro influencers. If they have 20,000 followers and they're relevant for your organization, you would probably perform better compared to someone who has millions of followers, but they're not really relevant.
I think there's some research done. Sometimes micro-influencers are better because they have better engagement with their own sort of fans, because they're more closer to them in a sense, whereas the large influencers, people follow them, but they don't really interact with their posts or engage with them a lot. Is that something that's probably been found out recently? And did have one final question is, does Facebook penalize linking to Twitter and Instagram posts?
So no, it doesn't penalize, but I know that in general, they would prefer you if you try and stay on Facebook, but we've seen all sorts of pages, of course, linking to websites. So there isn't an impact on that. I think it's probably better when it comes to sharing a video to try and keep it specific on Facebook. Or of course, when you go live, it means that you want to get them to spend time on Facebook, but don't be afraid still to use additional links.
Thank you. I know we've run slightly over time. So Tereza, I want to thank you again for delivering the webinar today. I have a quick two quick plugs for charities, and that's still on the webinar, is that we've sent you out a pre-Christmas challenge survey yesterday. This is going to help us gauge how charities are gearing up for the Christmas giving period and the state of the sector. So we greatly appreciate if you can complete the survey. It shouldn't take you any more than 10 minutes. And if you can complete it by next Tuesday, that'll be greatly appreciated. And as a bonus, the Big Give will be donating £100 each to 3 randomly selected charities that have completed the survey. And finally, the last webinar in the series is this Friday at 12 p.m. by Becky Slack of Slack Communications, and it will be on PR and storytelling. So please do join us for that if you want to find out more about that. But in the meantime, thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Tereza, again.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time. Bye.